This year is considered a small smartphone in 2026, but me and my little sausage fingers, we disagree. Now this Galaxy S23 is a few years old, but it's actually very similar in dimensions to newer smartphones and specifically the iPhone 17e, as you can see here. The iPhone 17e is actually ever so slightly bigger in all dimensions, but it's very comparable. It's very similar also in weight, as you can see. And importantly, if we look at the current generation of phones, none of the big smartphone makers makes anything smaller than the 17e. Nothing that I could find. So that is the smallest currently available model, and it's basically identical to this. And this is not small. And honestly, I've been struggling a little bit to understand this trend towards bigger and bigger phones. And I've seen a lot of explanations for that online, but I think I found one that I haven't seen discussed anywhere else. I can already tell you that that reason has nothing to do with consumer demand. But don't get it twisted, I do understand why people like bigger phones, and most people probably prefer bigger phones, I get that. But what I don't understand or even refuse to believe is that there isn't a smaller market but still profitable market for small smartphones, let's say, I don't know, 5 inches something, that size. So below 6 inches. This is 6.1. The newest phones, actually, we're gonna look at that, have gone up in size a little bit more. Yeah, I believe there must be a small market, but a sizable market still, for people who like to have their phones fit into their pockets comfortably, who have small sausage fingers like me, and who like to be able to reach all corners of their phone with ease, with their little hands, and people who don't like to be distracted as much by their phones as, yeah, most of us are. I continuously strive and also continuously fail to use my devices a little bit less for content consumption, and a big phone doesn't help you at all with that, actually quite the opposite. And then last but not least, I just love tiny gadgets. That's what the mini and minimal tech stands for. Okay, let's have a brief look at what the industry or the mainstream considers a small phone in 2026. So we have the Samsung Galaxy S26, the Google Pixel 10a. Flip phones are a whole different thing. That's a different form factor, not a slab phone. Come back to this. The S25, Pixel 10, the usual suspects on the Android side. We look at this list. We have the iPhone 17, again the 10a, 10 Pro, S26, the 17e we talked about. And then on this list here, it's again the iPhone 17, 17e, and a flip phone, another flip phone. Then let's have a quick look at my phone against the new kind of small flagships of today. You can see they're a little bit bigger. They also have bigger screens, 6.3 inches now. The S26 is actually 1 gram lighter, so that's cool. The pixels actually are even bigger. Surprisingly, the 10a is slightly bigger than the 10. It is lighter though, and the display is the same size. So 6.3 inches is becoming the new standard, which for me is a bit of a shame. I thought we had agreed on this form factor, but yeah, you can see that the new phones are still creeping up in size ever so slightly. And it makes me a little bit sad and upset. I thought Samsung wouldn't go in that direction. The S25, as you can see, was a little bit longer, a little bit taller than my S23, but also a little bit narrower and thinner, and it had a better display. And it was lighter too. So this form factor I can kind of live with. What the S26 is doing now, I don't like. This is really at the edge of what I want to use. So, I mean, everything that is added to it. Now we'll look at how my phone compares to the mini phones of yesteryear from not that long ago. And again, remember, this is basically the same size as the iPhone 17e, which is the smallest currently available smartphone from any big manufacturer. So here we have the comparison. The iPhone 13 mini is the last truly small phone from any big smartphone brand. And on the Android side, the last one, I believe, was the Sony Xperia XZ2 Compact or XZ2 Compact. The Xperia is quite a bit older than the iPhone, and you can see it's actually a bit larger, even though it has a smaller display. So this is not a very modern looking phone anymore. The iPhone 13 mini still looks pretty modern. It's weird. I don't believe this is true. I don't think this has a bigger usable surface. Anyways, the dimensions are correct. And you can see how big my S23 looks in comparison. So again, this is not a compact phone. And let's stick with the iPhone mini as an example because again it's the last really truly compact phone from a major smartphone brand that came out. It's still actually supported until this day. I believe it gets 2 or 3 more years of software updates at this point, so you can still use it. The size is pretty much perfect in my opinion because it fits all the criteria I've mentioned before. You cannot feel it in your pocket nearly as much as a phone of this size. You can use it one-handed. It has a screen that is big enough to be very useful, so you can do all your smartphone-y things on it. But on the other hand, it has a screen that is small enough to not really grab your attention as much. It's not as enjoyable to watch videos on it or to, I suppose, to play games on it. I don't play games on my phone. And that's actually a good thing in my book because again, I strive to use my devices less, not more. So I do believe that size was a great compromise, and actually I wouldn't mind if it was a little bit smaller even. But I would be very happy if anyone brought out a phone of the size of the iPhone mini. And a little aside, why am I not using this? First of all, I do prefer Android because it's a more open system, but also the iPhone mini came with a Lightning port, and that's unfortunately kind of a no-go for me. So now that we've established why the smaller form factor was so great, we have to think about the reasons or explain somehow why this was abandoned. And there's a number of reasons given traditionally, so to say, and I want to have a look at them, go through them, tell you what I think about them, and then I'll give you the reason that I think is maybe not the main reason, but a main reason, and that is seemingly always forgotten in this discussion. Battery capacity is always mentioned. Obviously, in a smaller phone, you can only fit a smaller battery. Makes total sense. Then supposedly 5G modems use more energy and stuff like that, and games are more demanding. People do more things with their phones, so obviously they have to become more powerful. So they use more electricity, probably despite the gains in efficiency. Behind that though is the fact that people use their phones for longer and longer periods of time. They have more screen on time, and then obviously you do need a bigger battery. But again, my aim is to not use my phone that much. So with the iPhone 13 mini, for example, I know I would be totally fine with the battery life as it is, and take into consideration that technology is advancing. There's new developments like silicon carbon batteries that do give you a significant bump in battery capacity over what the iPhone mini has in the same form factor. Having said that, it is definitely true that with a bigger phone, all other things being equal, you do get better battery life. Next is thermal management and heat dissipation. So with a larger surface, the phone dissipates heat more effectively. A larger phone might also give you space for a vapor chamber, for example, whereas a smaller one might not. So better thermal management on bigger phones, that's a fact. This is most relevant for games and other types of things that really push your phone over an extended period of time, which I tend not to do, but the argument is still true. Then camera hardware requirements, so space requirements are mentioned often. Modern cameras, which this is not, I mean, this has the same cameras as the S24, the S25, the S26. They haven't changed the hardware, but especially Chinese phone makers, they are putting bigger and bigger sensors in their phones. They take up more space. Then you have things like periscope, telephoto lenses, you have optical image stabilization, all of that needs space. That is true. But most of that space is going in this direction, not in like all the other directions. So I think the point is only partially relevant for smaller phones. I don't think it's a big hindrance, and I would be fine with a small phone that only has 1 or 2 cameras on it. So that could be a solution. Then there's the argument of economies of scale and component standardization. This one factor, I believe, why the mainstream model of the iPhone and the Samsung Galaxy always tend to have roughly the same screen size. Samsung has been producing the screens for the iPhone and for its own Galaxy series, so I suppose that these might actually be the same components or very similar to each other. So both companies profit from kind of growing the standard model at the same rate. And then at least on the Android side, you have other standardized components that are used across manufacturers. Let's take Snapdragon chips, for example. They come in one size, obviously. Same for the modems from Qualcomm. So they cannot get shrunk just because you decide to make a smaller phone. So that argument holds true. What this means is that if you decide to make a smaller phone now, it will be, comparatively speaking, more expensive than a standardized larger phone. But we saw with the iPhone mini that Apple was actually able to offer it at a lower price than the regular iPhone. They did have a lower profit margin too, but I guess if they had offered it at the same price, they still would have made more profit, if that makes sense. I'm not 100% sure about that fact, but it was $100 cheaper than the regular iPhone, so an additional $100 in pure profit probably would have meant more profit than the regular iPhone. So now this slowly transitions us into the argument I found. So a last kind of traditional argument is consumer perception that bigger phones are better. And that is definitely true. But I don't think that's just something that naturally occurred. One main argument from my side would be that with dumb phones, I lived through that era when phones became smaller and smaller and smaller, and smaller was more premium because it meant advanced manufacturing. It meant that the phones were more practical, and it was just a trend that was advertised and everyone wanted a smaller dumb phone. So with smartphones, the opposite has been happening. Bigger phones have been marketed as basically being better. So if you get the same features in a smaller phone, it now feels like you're getting a worse deal if you pay the same price because you're only getting the small screen. And going back to the iPhone mini, you can actually see in the keynote from Apple that they spent a lot less time on the iPhone mini. They also had a much lower marketing budget for the iPhone mini compared to the bigger iPhones, and so it's no surprise it didn't sell as well. Again, I do believe that most people prefer bigger phones. That's not my case. My case is that I think if they had spent the same amount of marketing and the same time in the presentation and everything, the same effort on making people want the iPhone mini, it would have sold better than it actually did. But also the marketing of the whole industry for many years played a role in this. And that finally brings us to the reason that I think is really mostly overlooked completely. And that is simply that a larger phone makes you use your phone more, which makes it possible for manufacturers, social media sites, data brokers, and companies that show you ads to make more money. I found this pretty old article from XDA that kind of showcases this. So as phone sizes grew, we can see that the number of daily sessions, so how often do we pick up our phones and unlock it and look at it, the number of minutes used per day, and the data usage per day all went up quite substantially. It's kind of funny to see these small screen sizes comparatively, but yeah, you can see the trend is pretty clear. So larger screens are simply more immersive, so you get more lost in them, so to say. If you watch videos, if you play games, you're more in that virtual digital world. This is very connected to larger screens also just having more visual appeal. Modern OLED screens just look great and they are like visual candy, and if you have more of it, that's just more enticing. Larger screens also lead to less cognitive friction. What I mean by that is that while you use your phone, sometimes you don't even have to zoom in when you have a bigger phone, for example, and zooming in and all kinds of gestures, everything is just easier. And then there is affective trust. I don't want to make this really scientific here. This kind of the inverse of what I want to say. So smartphone size screens constrain cognitive access. The opposite is also true. Larger screens increase cognitive access. So we take in what we see on a larger screen more than what we see on a smaller screen. And that is also true for advertisements. And then on large screens, we can multitask better. So we can watch a video while we do something else on our phones, which also keeps us on the phone. If we had to switch to a different device or stop one thing to do the other thing, then we wouldn't be so tied into the phone. But how do phone manufacturers specifically profit from this? Because it seems to me more directly obvious how social media websites or ad providers, how they earn more money. But the same is true for the phone manufacturers. So one of the ways they earn more money by you using your phone more is through App Store sales. If you use your phone more, you tend to use more apps. You also tend to do more in-app purchases. It's quite simple. And they also have the opportunity to sell you subscriptions like Google Drive or iCloud. Or very popular are the photo apps. People take a lot of pictures on their smartphones. The storage is not upgradable anymore. At one point you run out of storage and then you get a subscription often. And then last but not least, phones are usually the center of each ecosystem. So the iPhone is the center of the Apple ecosystem. Once you have one, you might get an Apple Watch, then you might also get a MacBook later, and so on. And it usually starts with the phones because everyone has a phone. Not everyone has a watch, not everyone has a tablet, and increasingly fewer people have laptops or computers. So the phone is usually where it starts, and it's the biggest driver for people to get locked into one ecosystem. ecosystem. And that is why also Google is expanding its ecosystem. Samsung has a complete ecosystem. Huawei had or has a complete ecosystem. Everyone is trying to do this. And if you use the centerpiece of the ecosystem more, you'll be drawn into the ecosystem a bit more. And some manufacturers actually show you ads for other products they sell. So that's one way they might get you. Or they might repel you, depending. So what hope do we, the people who like small phones, actually still have? These best small phone articles are not it, so let's close them. Here I looked at phones that are 5.9 inches or smaller, so below 6 inches, and that were released in the last 18 months. There aren't many. I'm sure this is not the complete picture. I have no affiliation with this website, but I know it and I find it pretty good to get an overview over different smartphones. But yeah, again, this is probably not complete, but it gives us a good idea. And you can see that almost all of these phones are rugged phones. That's number one. And 100% of these phones are from not so well-known Chinese manufacturers. Problem is, most of these will not get proper software support for longer periods of time, which is kind of a no-go for me. And I also don't want a rugged phone. So the only one in this list that would be kind of interesting to me is this, the Unihertz Titan 2 Elite Pro. Because Unihertz is a company that I know. I had one of their phones before, the Unihertz Jelly 2, which I was pretty happy with, but back then they didn't use the best manufacturing and materials, and they also only provided one software update, which also didn't work too well. With this new phone, at least, I know that they provide several years of software updates now, so they are kind of my single biggest hope for a usable, nice, small smartphone. From the same line of phones that I had, the Jelly phones, they had a number of those. The last one they released is probably 2 or 3 years old now, the Jelly Max, and they haven't released one of those in a while now, but I hope they will get back to it. So what else is there? There are flip phones. Flip phones could really be seen as properly small phones with a weird aspect ratio and cameras right in the display and a phablet inside when you unfold them, but it's something that I haven't tried yet myself. I haven't used a flip phone and I definitely want to try. So they are the last big hope from the big smartphone manufacturers. Or are they not? Because this here on my wrist, this is kind of a phone. It's a smartwatch, yes, but it has all the basic functionalities of a phone. Even GPS, NFC, everything. So my next video will be about trying to use this Galaxy Watch 8, that's the model, as my smartphone. And we'll see how that goes.